I would like to hear from this group what you know, anything that you know, terms or a little bit about end of life rituals in Judaism and Orthodoxy. Any thoughts? Yeah, Chelsea.
I know about if someone very close to you dies, like a mother, father, brother, sister, son, or daughter, you
Or
have to sit,
spouse.
or spouse, you have to sit Shiva for 7 days.
Right. So what is Shiva? What does it mean? The
It's
word,
basically
anybody
like,
know?
oh,
No, what does the word mean? Anybody know?
Does it mean stool or something like that?
Oh, that's a good try. But we'll try again. Because you do sit on a stool. Well, you sit on a lower chair. You don't actually have to sit on a stool. So Shiva means seven. That is literally what it means. It means seven. And there are 7 days in the week of Shiva. So that's where it comes from. And the reason we call it sitting Shiva is because traditionally the mourner sits and receives visitors. That doesn't mean that the mourner can't get up. They can always get up and walk around. They don't have to sit. But it's become the term that's used in Hebrew. The same term is used, Lashevet Shiva, to sit Shiva, or to sit Shiva. The thing is just that you'll know that in Judaism, Orthodoxy, I don't know about other denominations, the first day and the last day, what we say is a little bit of the day is like the whole day. So the first day is always going to be when the funeral is, because, well, that's not true. Most of the time, the first day you sit Shiva is is when the day of the funeral, and whatever light is left in the day. Remember, when does a day start in Judaism? Talk, 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 talk.
at
Everybody's
night.
off camera tonight. Yes, at night. So, for example, when my father passed away, we buried him. It ended up just the way the flights worked and bringing his body to Israel, that the funeral was in the afternoon, late afternoon. It was a summer day. And it was very close to when the sun was going down. So we literally sat for 10 minutes in the cemetery just to start the process, so that that day will be day one, because we never want to extend needlessly. We don't want to needlessly extend the amount of time for Shiva. So even though we theoretically, you could say we only set Shiva for half an hour before the next day started, but that's considered like a full day. And on the last day, basically, the the mourner, usually the prayer services are in the mourner's home, not always, but usually. So once the prayer service is over and all the people who came for prayer services in the morning leave, basically that's the end of Shiva. So even though it's not a full 24-hour period for the seventh day, everybody following me on that? That's why a Shiva can feel shorter or longer depending on how many days. When the funeral in Israel, they bury at night. So theoretically, your Shiva could start at 10 at night, and then it feels like a very long day, the first day of Shiva. Everybody following that? I mean, people even got buried 12 o'clock at night. It can happen. It's not that common, but it happens. For example, if there's a holiday coming up, a Yom Tov, you can't bury on the Yom Tov, so you're going to try to bury as soon as possible. We try, of course, to wait until all the mourners can arrive, because mourners, meaning what Chelsea said, the ones in the seven, it's also seven, the seven closest. So the reason it's seven is spouse, brother, sister, father, mother, son, daughter. But we can shorten it by saying parents, siblings, children, and spouse. Of course, today with gender fluidity, it's a little more complicated, but that's the way it starts. Now, has everybody here heard of Shiva? Have anybody heard? Anybody? This new to somebody? You had never heard of it? Latoya. Okay. So now you'll hear of it more. And if you ever look at the emails coming out from HR, are you on the emails from HIR listing, Latoya?
I get the emails, but I really don't understand. I mean, I have an idea that it's relating to a funeral or someone's passing,
Well,
but I have
usually
no idea.
it usually says funeral in the subject line.
Right. So that I have that
That's a
correlation.
giveaway. Just say it. So now you know when we say funeral and Shiva details, you already know much more than you did 5 minutes ago, because it's the place, the location, and the times when where that person is sitting Shiva, when, and what hours it's okay to receive. Like today, it didn't used to be common, but today it's much more common to have a break in the middle of the day for lunch, maybe a break for dinner, or maybe somebody, doesn't get up early or goes to sleep early, whatever it is, because it can feel very overwhelming and exhausting to have Shiva hours all day long. Although again, like it was 20 something years, 27 years ago, whatever, 28 when my father passed away, we didn't have breaks. It was just all day. People could come. That was what was accepted. And I think it's a good thing that lately there's been more, movement towards making it more tenable, more, easier, especially when there's older people, but not only. And sometimes it can depend on if there's one person sitting Shiva, that person is actually going to receive every single visitor. Whereas when there's more people, so then it gets diffused a little bit more across. Okay. But let's roll it back a little bit. First of all, there are special prayers. I wouldn't put that in. I'm going to write down for myself all the things that I missed so I can add that into the source sheet. I will send out an email with the source sheet, but I'm going to go over everything in there. So don't worry. There's something called Vidui confession. I know that sounds very non-Jewish, but it is called Vidui. And sometimes the person is aware and awake and able to say it themselves. More often, if that person has slipped into a state of pre-death, then the person coming, either a rabbi or anybody can do it. There's no magical, just so you know, it's not magical that somebody's a rabbi, but we're much more well-versed in the liturgy and we have pastoral training. So, and hopefully rabbis have pastoral bedside manners or whatever you want to call it. I certainly hope so. So often it's a rabbi or some sort of pastoral figure. It doesn't have to be, who says this special either. Remember we learned about the Shema prayer where we cover I Shema Yisrael. Remember that? That's part of it. But then there's more things that will sound familiar if you look at, that's okay, Gabby, don't worry. That you can always look at the recording. The things that we know a little bit from Yom Kippur, from the liturgy of Yom Kippur. So that is said. And it is usually said by the bedside of somebody who is dying, either they themselves or somebody from their family or, a pastoral or rabbinic figure. So that happens before. The other thing we need to know is that life in Judaism is the highest value, which I think we've discussed before. And therefore, we're not allowed to hasten somebody's death. Now, that can get tricky when a person is near the end of their life. And do they want intervention? Do they not want intervention? Do you resuscitate them at any cost? Do you, DNR, you might have heard of things like that. Do not revive, do not resuscitate. What if somebody decides on their own not to take nourishment? What do you have to do? It's complicated. We don't have to go into all that. But often if there's a tricky situation, you can ask then you do have to ask somebody who's rabbinic, because the rabbinic community has halachic knowledge, because this would be about halacha, Jewish law, if you're allowed to or not. People got that? Okay. And another interesting thing, just so you know, about organ donation, which is absolutely upheld by Jewish law, but there's a very strong divide between people who say when the heart stops beating or when the brain or when the breathing stops, because one can last longer than the other by keeping them alive by machines, and then the person's being kept alive, then how will they die if you keep them alive by machine? But sometimes you have to keep them alive by machine so that you can get the organs, and yet organ donation can save other lives. So organ donation is a somewhat contested topic, unfortunately, when there's actually ways to follow that one can donate organs, which is really, really, really important in my mind. If somebody's in a car accident, whatever, and has died, basically no brain activity, the organs. And very often you hear that a person, even though they died, they were able to live on through, they donated 7 organs. It's just amazing to, a heart, kidneys, lung, liver, corneas. And that's really beautiful. Is this hard for you to hear, Chelsea?
Yeah, I'm really bad with body stuff. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
Well, I can
didn't
take
know
a
it's
step
that
back.
obvious.
I can take a step back from that. I'm very passionate about it because so many from the right wing community or even people who don't know are against it. But I would suggest everybody to sign an organ donor card. But usually there's like an X box to check that you consult a rabbinic figure. Okay, so we'll move on from there. I'm just touching on the subject so that you know about it. And well, maybe a little bit more. I hope it won't be too uncomfortable. I'll try to do it lightly. So now the person has passed away. Just so you know that there's rituals around everything. So there's a ritual cleansing, a ritual washing. You don't have to know that much about it, but the body is buried in beautiful, simple cotton white shrouds or clothing, and dealt with a lot of love and respect and dignity. And then we go to the funeral. So I don't want to go into too many details, but in Israel, you should know people are buried not in caskets. I don't know if you knew that, because as soon as possible, they should be returned to the earth, except for soldiers. Soldiers are buried in caskets because sometimes, I don't know if anybody else, but sometimes there's damage that we don't want to, show on a stretcher in some way. But in any case, anytime you go to a funeral in Israel, you see the body wrapped up in a talit and whatever, usually in a talis, a talit. And something I also didn't mention about priests, kohanim. Somebody is a kohen. What's a kohen?
A priest.
A priest, right? It sounds so funny in English. But has anybody been to shul where you see the kohanim standing in the front and giving a blessing? So kohanim have a certain status in Judaism, and they're not allowed to kind of reduce their purity, their spiritual purity by touching a dead body, unless it is, I think if for their family, the close family, then they can, and they must actually. So usually you'll see a kohen walking on the outside, walking on a special path. In Israel, they have special pathways for kohanim so that they're whatever distance they need to be from the casket they will be, or from all the bodies actually buried in the cemetery.
About that, Rabbi. Jeff and I went to a Shabbat lunch a couple months ago, and they were briefly just talking, of course, so fast, about this particular topic. And I believe the wife, was married to a Kohen, and she
Yeah.
was carrying a boy who would then be a Kohen. Jeff, do you remember
Yep.
that? Yeah, and so
Oh,
she was
yeah.
saying that she couldn't, there was a funeral, someone passed away, and
And
she
she couldn't go because of the baby boy. Yeah.
That's what, okay. So I was trying to figure out,
Oh.
so the wife also has some
Yeah.
responsibility.
Well, only while she's carrying the baby. Afterwards, when he comes out of the body, he's his own person. So, and you wouldn't bring babies as a rule to a cemetery as a rule. I guess if you're breastfeeding, but yes, that baby boy, so she would. That's really interesting because before people knew if it was a boy or a girl, I don't know what they did. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, thank you. Very good, Latoya. Look at you. Rock that one. Which just shows you can glean information all over. But now do you understand better why she said that? Right? Because she's carrying a baby boy.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Tifara Ruth, what's your question?
So adding on to her point, I don't know where I got this from, or maybe I don't even know how, I guess like halakhically necessary it is, but I didn't think children like pre-bar mitzvah went to funerals.
You know,
Like,
that's not halachic. That has
Okay.
nothing to, not really. That's pastoral.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
I think it really depends on the age, the maturity, the closeness.
Okay.
It really just depends. There's no, not that I know of, it's not halachic. It's whatever feels right.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes when you deprive a child of going to a funeral, then they can feel they don't have closure. But it really depends on the age. And you might see an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and it just gives them closure. So it might be something to discuss with the child ahead of time, discuss with the psychologist. And when my father died, my 8-year-old, was she 8? She was about 8, 8 or 9. I think she could have gone, but a friend who's a pediatric psychologist, child psychologist, said not to, so we didn't. I can't tell you if it was right or wrong, but my older two, who were 12 and 14, they did go.
Okay,
So
all right.
yeah, but that's a good
Thank
question.
you.
Thank you. But that's absolutely pastoral, and we should do whatever is right. Okay, so funeral I don't really have to go into. They usually explain what happens there, but what I want to tell you is something called tearing kriya. Kriya just means the act of tearing. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it used to be in olden times that people would disfigure themselves or cut them, do weird things to show grieving. Cut their clothing, cut their whatever they would do, make marks. There are still, I think, tribes and places where people make marks in their body from grieving. We don't allow that. Like in Judaism, you're not supposed to ever disfigure your body. But as a way of marking the fact that our lives have been torn asunder to some extent, we do something called tearing kriya, which is literally ripping a shirt. All through the laws of mourning customs, there's a difference between mourning for parents, which is the most natural. Like the most natural is that our parents will pass away before us because they're the previous generation, and because we're beholden to our parents to giving birth to us. Like the reason we're in this world is because of our biological parents. Sometimes this can extend also if one is adopted. One could do the same thing for adoptive parents, but let's just take the majority here. That doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just saying exception cases can always speak to a rabbi and discuss what to do. But in general, so in order to differentiate, for example, between the parents and everybody else, the tearing is on this is my left side, even though it looks like my right. And then for all the other relatives, the tearing. But here you don't tear, about a fistful, and say a special bracha, a special blessing. That's called Dayan Ha'emet, meaning the true judge, because God is the only true judge, and God is the one who decides when somebody is born and decides when somebody leaves this world, whether they're sick or not sick. So that happens at a funeral only for the mourners, remember? No, there's any, and then at the end of the funeral, whatever happens at the funeral happens at the funeral, and the eulogies, the Kaddish is said, which we'll go into in a moment. There's a shura, a line that is set up traditionally only for men, but today we do it for women as well. The mourners pass through and we recite a traditional verse, which says, "May you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem." And that is the traditional verse that we say to comfort people, in addition to whatever words of comfort we offer. That usually closes the funeral. Now, hopefully the person running the funeral will give information, will guide you. I mean, I certainly do it at every funeral, even if it's a funeral people know. There's some people who don't know what I'm doing next. So I always give context and framing. But just so you know, because in natural life, we end up at funerals. As we get older, we end up at funerals. That's just the way it is. So just so you have a feeling for what happens, that give a little bit of framing of what happens. Okay, there's also a very special mitzvah, a very special mitzvah commandment. It's something called chesed shel emet. I'm going to put all these things into the file because these feel like important terms. And that means a kindness, a true kindness. The truest kindness is when you do a kindness to someone who cannot give back to you. And a person who's passed away cannot give it back to you. And this kindness is when we kind of tuck in the person by covering them with earth over the casket. And that's something that you'll see also. Nobody forces you to do it. You do it if you wish to, but it is a mitzvah to do that. And so we cover it with earth. And if possible, we wait until it's completely covered, and then we continue with the second part or the last part. The other part of the funeral is saying Kaddish, and this continues for a number of months. So who here is familiar with the word Kaddish? Yeah, what do you know about it, Chelsea?
After someone close to you dies, you have to say the mourner's Kaddish at shul for a year.
Beautiful.
With, a minyan.
Right. Great. Ooh, you covered a lot. So I'll just qualify that the year is 11 months. What we say is that 12 months is somebody who was evil or wicked. So obviously we don't want anybody to be called wicked, even if some people had parents who they might have thought were wicked, but we still don't do it. It would be really unusual for somebody to do it for 12 months. And that's only for parents. And that's something I'm going to
That's
get to.
really interesting. Why is there a distinction like that if no one would ever, you know what I mean? If no one would ever like do it for the
It
full 12
might have
because
been, it might have been at certain points of time in our history that people who, let's say, gave up Jews, you know, who were killed by enemy forces, or who maybe converted to another religion with idolatry. Possibly they would have been kept 12 months. I don't have a good answer to you, but maybe it's just a nice way to say it. I don't know. It's like they don't need 12 months. You know, everybody's good. They only need 11 months. And supposedly, according the whole lore behind Kaddish feels very tenuous. There's no really solid source. It's more stories, but it's become extremely entrenched in our tradition. And in fact, it feels good to have something traditional to do other than the morning practices, which we're going to get to. It feels good to have something to do, although it can feel to people who don't usually go to a minyan, right? Going to shul where there's 10 men over bar mitzvah age. Everybody with me on this? Forum, right? To say, now, since COVID, what we've offered, at least in our shul, is that when there's 10 men in person in the shul, we do Zoom anyway. But when there's 10 men, then the people on Zoom can say Kaddish with the minyan. And a lot of people don't come to shul and say it on Zoom. But only if there's 10 men, in the shul.
Is
Rabbi
the
Bell.
reason why, oh, sorry.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to ask, is the reason why it's longer, 12 months for a wicked or an evil person because they need more prayer to redeem their
Yes.
soul?
Yes, exactly. Because we believe that saying Kaddish somehow redeems self. Thank you, Gabby. It's great. That was perfect that you had that. Supposedly, we have something in our literature that if somebody doesn't have Kaddish being said for them, then they're in hell, whatever that means. So we say it to remember them, and it gives us a place to put it. And many times I've heard from people who are near the end of their 11 months, and even though in one hand they don't feel the sort of burden of going, you know, the weightiness, but they also feel like I'm saying goodbye now to my parents. And somebody who's close to their parents, who was close, not everybody is, you know, that can feel difficult to say goodbye in that way. It's also on the yard site, which is the time of the year. That's what it literally means in Yiddish. Is that the anniversary of the death the following year, the following year? It's also a day to say Kaddish.
What's the
There's actually
Hebrew
two
term
kinds.
for yard site?
Yom HaZikaron, Day of Remembrance.
Thank you.
But people say yard site very often, even in Israel, for whatever reason. Jeff, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, there's different versions of Kaddish, right?
Right. So I want to go into that now. So the ones that the mourners say are called Rabbi's Kaddish or Mourners Kaddish. In our show, we'd announce it, but people don't get confused. I mean, people who know it don't need us to announce it, but there's often somebody who's new or just has never done it before. So they don't remember which one to say where. The Rabbi's Kaddish is generally said after verses from the Mishnah, or I think from the Mishnah have been recited. I don't need to go into when why you do one or the other, but the mourner's Kaddish is said after very specific biblical verses that are recited, and that's called the written Torah, or mostly from the written Torah, I would say, whereas the oral Torah, the Mishnah, is what prefaces what we say is the Rabbi's Kaddish. That's the easiest way to explain it. Now, the truth is the Chazan, the prayer leader, also says Kaddish. He says a different kind of Kaddish, which is the Kaddish that's similar, but a little bit different. It has many of the similar words. Sometimes it has a little bit extra. And that's at certain points in the davening to kind of break it up. It kind of signifies this part of davening is finished, the bookend. And usually during the week, it's a mourner who leads it. A mourner leads it so that person gets to say more Kaddishes. And then if somebody has a yard site, that supersedes the person who's in the year of mourning. Now, remember 11 months is only for parents. It turns out that so 1 second. So let me explain now. First, there's Shiva versus, even before that, when a person dies, there's something called Aninut, which is a state of being that's being in limbo. Before the person actually has the funeral, is buried, it could be quickly, as we said. If everybody's there and the body is there in Israel. They bury them right away that day or the next day. But often it takes a while for the body. Like I know somebody whose sister is very, very, very ill, lives in Florida. What?
I'm sorry to interrupt. You just said something. I just want to make sure I'm staying along. So someone passes away and you can bury them the next day?
You could
Did
bury
you
them
say-
that day. You could bury them that day. If everybody's available and around, you could bury them that day.
So there's like no hospital, like there's nothing like that involved?
Well, they might die in the hospital. What do you mean?
I thought it took a while sometimes to get the body and stuff like that.
That's what I said. I said if the body's of it, if everything is there and there's a death
Oh.
certificate and all the mourners are there, you could do it right away. But like this person is, his sister is very, very ill in Florida and she will be buried in Long Island. So obviously it won't be that day because when it happens, we don't know when it'll happen, but she's on hospice. Then they'll have to get the death certificate. They'll have to get it on a flight. Then it has to, go from the airport. So there are certain things that'll hold it. So it's not going to be the next day or that day. It'll take a little while. Or being buried in Israel takes even longer. So and you're not going to fly on Shabbat. One second, you're not going to fly on Shabbat. You're not going to fly on Yom Tov. So just with my mother was really odd, but her brother passed away in Florida. And he happened to have passed away right before Yom Kippur. So they couldn't fly the body the day before Yom Kippur because it didn't have enough time. So and then they couldn't fly it after Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur was on a Thursday. So they couldn't fly it on Friday because again, it didn't have enough time. So finally got to Israel Sunday and Monday night was Sukkot. So he was buried the night before Sukkot. And there's another law that says that holidays truncate Shiva. They just stop it. So my mother she had like 7 days before the body got there, but then only 1 day of Shiva, which is the opposite of what most people have. So weird things can happen depending on what's going on and what the particular, example is, and what the particular circumstances are. Sifara, Ruth, and then Jeff.
I also thought it was a practice, and I think this also piggybacks off of Latoya, is that as Jews, we don't embalm the body. Is that
Yep,
like,
thank you. Yep. What
so
is
the burial has to,
embalm?
is that
Right,
the
or
is that
cremate.
the right term? Embalm. So
When
the
you get
burial
cleaned
has to
out,
happen.
yeah, all the organs and stuff.
Yeah, because the body is naturally going to start to deteriorate.
Well,
So
they do something. They keep it very, very, very cold. I think that happens because my
Uh-huh,
uncle,
uh-huh.
it took 6 days until
Yeah,
they keep it
absolutely.
very, very, very cold. It was actually somebody who I knew, and it took months till they found me. And in the meantime, he was just kept very, very, very cold. But they finally figured out that I was that person's rabbi, and then that person was able to be buried the next day. So they do have ways even without embalmment. I don't know what it is, and I didn't ask. Jeff, what was your question?
I was just going to make an observation and then add a question. The thing we're encouraging is to remember the person while they're alive, right? So not necessarily.
Wait, when, what?
After they pass, you don't necessarily want to. That's why the coffin is closed normally.
Wait, 1 second. 1 second. There is no issue of, that's the embalming and putting them kind of on display. What is awake or whatever? I don't even know what it's called. No.
I thought
I
that
don't
was
know
a
what you mean,
concept.
but the person is never on display. I don't know if it's about remembering them when they're alive, but we treat them with a tremendous amount of dignity, tremendous. And you're not allowed to actually mistreat the body either. It's a whole question about whether it can be used for science, or you'll often hear that you can't do an autopsy. Sometimes you need to do an autopsy to find out medical information, like did this person have a certain illness, but as a rule, we don't do autopsies unless there's a very, very compelling reason for that. So I'm not sure what you mean about leaving the body open, the coffin. Who would see it? There's no time to do that in. Not sure when.
Well, I just heard while I was a kid, I used to get a lot of my information from my brother. So he had told me that
may not be reliable. Yeah,
it's true. So he had told me that we bury the body as quickly as possible because we don't really want to see, we don't want to focus on the person as dead. We want to remember them while they were alive.
an interesting idea. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I don't know if that's the full reasoning. Certainly, we want to respect the dignity. And as soon as possible, we bury the body. There's 100% an urgency, but that doesn't always happen just because of logistics. But that's why in Israel, you could even have a nighttime burial because of this urgency of burying the body and not. And by the way, it's just a different, Chavri Kadisha are the holy people who actually handle the body and make sure that it gets buried properly. And they have different customs, and you really cannot argue with them.
One more question, Rabbi. So you
Sure.
did mention that holidays stop Shiva. All holidays or certain holidays?
Yes, all biblical holidays, and only the holiday. In other words, Rosh Hashanah stops it, Yom Kippur stops it, Sukkot the first day. The last day is a little more complicated. It's a new holiday on Sukkot, but on Pesach it's not. Whatever, there's tables to figure it out. Shavuot stops it. All of those stop it.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I was with someone, he passed away. His funeral was the day of Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach, and his family sat Shiva for 2 hours. He had 4 children. The oldest was 16, maybe 18, 17. And that was their whole Shiva, was those 2 hours, which felt like probably a little hard. Although I've heard from other people, for this particular one, it was good that it was cut short, but Now the opposite is if somebody dies on Chol HaMoed, that's the intermediate days on Pesach and Sukkot, you're not allowed to sit Shiva on Chol HaMoed. So what happens is you bury the body on Chol HaMoed, but you only start sitting Shiva after Chag is over. So you actually end up being a longer time, much longer time, but I think you count 1 day. So you only have to sit for 6 days. Again, as I said, there's a whole table and computation. You don't need to know that. Whoever rabbinic figure figures that out. All right. Now, not only is embalmment not allowed, because you're not allowed to really do anything except the simplest washing and cleaning. That's it. Cremation is very much against Jewish law, and we consider it as not respecting and honoring the body. It's not something we're going to argue or discuss. Like it's, and many Jews do it. There are many people who feel super strongly and try to convince them out of it. That usually is not going to happen when the person passed away. You got to teach that way ahead of time. Not a good time ever to try to discuss difficult subjects. There's an expression when the dead person is lying in front of him. Like when you just experience somebody passing away, you're grieving. As a terrible time to try to teach somebody something new. So often we have those cases, and some people say, well, you should give them a funeral service, and some people say you shouldn't. Some people say you should. Why? So that they still feel a part of Jewish, and the other ones say, no, it looks like you're legitimizing it. So, complicated. So that's where complications start to set in. But halachically, I wanted you to know that we're not supposed to cremate. It's a way of honoring and respecting the body. It should go back to the earth and not be cremated. Okay, now let's turn to the mourners. I think we sort of finished up there. So Shiva, they generally do not leave the house where they're sitting Shiva unless they're sleeping somewhere else. Although it often happens that, let's say somebody's in Israel, so they have to come back to America. So that's okay, but unless they have a compelling reason, they just sit Shiva in one location. But sometimes they fly back home for the funeral. They sit with the other parents or with their siblings for a day or two. Then they come back to their own community, because it always feels good to be comforted by people who know you and love you. Is everybody clear about what Shiva feels like, or not so much? Sort of, yeah. I mean, it's somber usually. Sometimes, there can be laughter. Depends on how horrific the situation is. Often the community signs up for meals, because the Shiva house is so busy with people. The mourners are not going to be cooking. And they certainly aren't. If they needed to cook, they should only cook for themselves. They shouldn't be cooking for anybody else. You're not supposed to be focusing on anything other than the hard work of Shiva, and which is hard work, because when one is grieving, one is really exhausted. So the community usually, there's a special meal that's eaten when one comes home from the funeral called Seudat Havra'ah, which is a healing meal. I don't know, where the name came from. I probably could look that up. But what's one of the symbols is that somebody, a neighbor or the community, offers a hard-boiled egg. Of course, people who are vegan don't eat it, or people who can't eat eggs. They could eat something else that's round. The idea of round being the cycle of life. And the other is that an egg has no mouth. It's round and smooth all around, because very often the mourner feels their mouth has been taken from them because they don't have words given their grief. So during Shiva, they sit on a low chair if they can. If they have a backache, they shouldn't. And they receive visitors, and the visitors come to comfort. And what do you talk about? So, it's awkward. What do you talk about? Sometimes they had a good relationship. Sometimes they had a contentious relationship. So you try to take your cue from the mourner. You usually wait for the mourner to recognize you. That's what the halacha says. You let them start it. It really shouldn't be about sports and work, and it really should be more about what they're feeling. You can't force them to do that, but it is meant to be something of a processing space, and also hearing stories about the person who passed away. Very often the mourners hear stories that they never heard during the person's life, kindness or other things that person did that the person who died never shared. So a lot of things get unearthed during Shiva. One does not shave. Men don't shave. We take showers not at all or minimally, just quick rinse, because today, you see people didn't shower more than once a week. But today, obviously, we shower once or twice a day, whatever. So people who really are feeling icky, they can shower a very, very, very quick shower, not in very hot water. It's not for pleasure. We reduce the amount of pleasure. And that's really what we do during the year. And again, remember what I said, the year is only for parents. So all the other relatives, it only lasts a month, the laws of mourning. Which, if you think about in the natural course of things, since we expect our parents to predecease us, and of course we're hoping that they only die in old age after they've had a good life, long life, then sometimes we might need the external trappings of the 11, 12 months to keep us kind of focused on that. Whereas when it's somebody, a child, they're terrible, sad, a spouse or a sibling, we'll be perhaps more keenly aware of it even without it. And also during the year, what happens is we step down our mourning practice. So during the week of Shiva, we pretty much don't go outside the house. We don't go to anything unless you can't get a minyan in your house. And then somebody might go to shul to be able to say Kaddish. Shabbat, you don't do it in the home. Usually do it in the shul, even during the week of Shiva. But we don't shave, we don't shower, we can change our underwear. We don't usually change our outer clothing. We keep the shirt that's torn. That's important. And again, unless there's a problem with it. And that happened to me during one of the times I sat Shiva. I was allergic to the shirt. It was terrible. First I put on an undershirt, then I put on a short sleeve shirt underneath, then I put on a long sleeve. Nothing helped. I was allergic. I had to switch the shirt. I had no choice. It's kind of strange. And there's a ritual getting up on the last day of Shiva, and one kind of walks around the block to transition back into more or less regular life, but not going to happy gatherings. One does not generally go to smachot, to weddings, to bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, things like that. You don't usually go to live concerts. Some people don't even watch TV or go to movies. That's their choice. I would say musicals, less than a drama of some kind. One doesn't go to many social gatherings. That's the most the strictest part of it. And so there's the 1 week, there's the 30 days, and then there's the year. And the 30 days is for everybody, and it is a step down, meaning you're allowed to go out, you can go to work, but I guess you can take a shower, but usually we say lukewarm water, or not lukewarm, that it's cold. I just mean not very hot. And you can take off your shirt and throw it away if you want to. You don't need to keep the torn shirt. We also wear Yom Kippur shoes during the week of Shiva, meaning non-leather. They could be Crocs, they could be sneakers, they could be barefoot, they could be slippers, but you don't wear leather shoes, same as on Yom Kippur. And so you go back to regular shoes after the week of Shiva. The 30 days have within it 7 days of Shiva, so it finishes 3 weeks later. And we don't get haircuts during this month either, so you can do that after Shloshim. But for parents, I guess also pretty much after the 30 days are over. And again, we're stepping down the mourning, so the last 11 months of the 12-month mourning period, there are fewer restrictions about what we do. But very often somebody might just miss many, many weddings. Now, if it's somebody who's very close to you and the bride and groom or the family would really feel your absence, or if it's the parents of the bride or groom, then they come to the wedding. And then you try to figure out what to do to minimize their partaking of the live music, so to speak. But, and again, these are things that, just so you know, when somebody doesn't come, when somebody comes without a spouse, it's very often that the spouse is in the year of mourning. How are we doing so far? Okay. Let me take a pause and ask if there are questions.
What happens if there aren't remains or someone is presumed dead? Like, how do you do that?
That's really, no, that's a really good question. Like after 9/11, that was a big question. Look, in Israel, for example, the Rabbanut, that's the official rabbinic organization of the government, they only when they determined, even if it was a hostage, once they knew that person was dead, or however they knew that, they would like give permission. They told families, you can now sit Shiva, even though they haven't given him a proper burial yet, because he hasn't been brought back. And we don't know when that will happen. But when that happens, even when they bring the body back, then he will have a funeral and maybe they'll sit for an hour or something like that. But it's complicated, Gabby. It's complicated. Presumed dead is very complicated. That's the worst, like the hardest when you don't know. And each case is dealt with on a case by case. But it's very hard to be in that kind of limbo. What's one of the very interesting things, which I haven't said, is that when one is in limbo in a regular case, when let's say it's 2 days between the day the person died, 1 or 2 days, and until the burial, they're in this period of aninut. Now, because during this period, they must, according to halacha, they must take care of the funeral and the person who died and all the details. Because they must do that, they are exempt from all other positive mitzvahs. They don't have to say blessings. They're not allowed to, actually. They don't put on tefillin. They don't put on a talit. They don't pray, except for Shabbat when it's lifted and Yom Tov, if that happens in between the passing and the burial. So just one more thing that, it's very unusual when a person is in a state of aninut for a long time. Doesn't often happen. It happens when it takes a long time to get the body to wherever it has to get buried. I mean, they're always more complicated. There are many, many scenarios. I'm just giving you the basics so that you know when people speak about somebody who had a close relative pass away, just so that you understand some of the terms that are used. Any questions about this? Any questions that somebody that's unclear or like to know more of? Most people find the Shiva to be actually quite comforting. Not everybody. Somebody once told me, who's sadly her grown daughter passed away from cancer. She told me that only after Shiva was she able to realize that she was comforted by people coming. She wasn't able to talk during the Shiva, but it actually relieved a little bit of the pain just by having somebody show up. You don't even have to say anything. You can just sit there, offer them a smile or a hug if they're willing to accept it. And just presence means I care. It doesn't take away the agony or the pain, but it does like lift it a teeny bit, knowing that other people care about you. And she said she only really understood in retrospect how, as hard as it would have been even harder if people hadn't come. So she was able to take that with her, which I always found very powerful.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just for clarification, so Shiva is the 7-day period that we were just talking about, that the 30-month
30-day.
30-day period, that's also called a Shiva? Or that's
called Shloshim, meaning 30. Shloshim. It's in the file, which I haven't shared, so I can put it in here for now, the link, but I'm going to make it a little richer. I'm going to fill in all the things that came up now. Called Shloshim, and Shloshim actually means 30. So okay, I'm putting in the chat, but I'll also send out an email when I feel that it's ready. So you're all welcome to look at it. It has some of the basics of end of life. That's called Shloshim. Everything has its own name. And then Shana, it all begins with the Sh, but that just happens to be. Shiva is 7, Shloshim is 30, and Shana means 1 year. Oh, it didn't share it? Huh. Oh, you're right. Sorry about that. There you go. Okay now? Can you get into it now? Cool. Sorry about that. So I guess that's pretty much wanted you to know about it. I'm sorry we had to finish with this, but we do know that end of life is part of life. And it's good to have rituals. It's just really good to have rituals because we often feel bereft and don't know what to do. But when we have a sort of protocol to follow, that's just helpful in not having to think, what do I need to do? So let's follow the protocol, and then we try to cocoon the mourners during that week. Now, of course, afterwards, when they finish the Shiva, that becomes much harder, but that's separate. This is the beginning when the shock is usually when the shock, I can't say the grief is the greatest then, but I would imagine, that it's the greatest, and the shock is certainly the greatest. It's not always a shock, it depends on the circumstances, but even when somebody's dying, there's still something different about that person being alive and that person passing away. So, that's pretty much what I had to tell you about end of life. It's important for you to know them. You don't have to dwell on it, but I think that when and if it happens that you end up going to a funeral, going to a Shiva house, you'll just be more, or if somebody says, when does my Shloshim end? At least you'll understand the question, right? Just so that you know it. Or here's a good one that's coming up this year. This year is a leap year. We discussed that, I think. In a leap year, there's 1 extra month, right? So it's complicated because Adar appears twice. There's Adar Aleph, the first Adar, and Adar B'Is, the second Adar. So let's give an example that somebody passed away right after Pesach in the month of Nisan. So the yahrzeit date, the anniversary date, is going to be, let's say, the 28th of Nisan. I'm just throwing that out. Nisan happens after these 2 months of Adar. So on one hand, you have to observe the yahrzeit on the day that person died, right? The person died on the 28th of Nisan, so his or her yahrzeit is the 28th of Nisan. But because there's an extra month, you end up observing 13 months, right? Because instead of 12 months of the Hebrew year, there's now 13. So it's really interesting. After 11 months, you stop Kaddish. After 12 months, you stop mourning practices. And after 13 months, you actually have the yahrzeit. So instead of 2 stopping points, there's 3. I mean, it's not a big deal, but you have to figure it out. So every time there's a leap year, it causes kind of, what do we do? And now I'm getting a lot of questions because people whose parents' yahrzeit fell in Adar, that's the month, they want to know, do they observe it in the first Adar or the second Adar? So in Ashkenazic custom, you actually observe it in both as a rule. You just observe it, meaning you say Kaddish, you think about them. There are certain places that have the custom that one fasts on just during the day on their parents' yahrzeit, their parents' anniversary of death. My father had that custom. I find it very difficult to fast, so I did not keep it up. And I said to my children, listen, I know that Sadie had it. You don't have to fast, on my yahrzeit. And they're like, you didn't have to worry about that, Ema. We weren't planning on doing it anyway. I'm like, okay. Which was fine, because why would I want to make it harder for them? The first few years when I was fasting, it happens to be he's in the summer, which is a very long day. Right in between, by the way, the longest fast day and the longest fast day. It's literally like sandwiched. And it was so hard. All I could think of was the fasting as opposed to, focusing on the fast day, on the yahrzeit. And I just said, I can't do this. So I stopped. I actually had to do an annulment of the vow, which is something we've spoken about. That's done Rosh Hashanah before. Because I hadn't stipulated, I'm not taking this on. I just assumed I had to do it. I had to do an annulment of it, and it feels way better for me. And my brothers fast, and I give them a lot of credit for fasting, but it's not going to work for me. And the reason, by the way, is we say that it's the day of the yard site is a bit of a Yom Kippur. It's like a day of judgment for the parents as well as for the children. So that's why there's a custom, but you don't have to. It's just, it is a custom. It's not halacha, but it's a strong custom in certain circles, not in all circles. So I didn't tell any of these people who asked me that they have to fast on both days, but I don't think they're custom, in Adar 1 and Adar 2. But I don't think they didn't add, none of them asked me, so I didn't even bring up the fasting. But just so you know that there is a custom like that. So just if you ever hear about it, you'll be like, oh, okay, but I don't have to do it. That's okay. Rabbanit Bracha doesn't do it. I definitely don't have to do it. That was a joke. Small humor. Anything else I can? If not, I'd like to talk with you about what our next sessions should be. I know in the past I've asked you, and that's when I think we talked about kashrut. Do we want to go back and do another prayer, slip in another thing? Is that helpful? Weekday prayer, Yom Tov prayer, anything that comes up that people would like to learn, that the majority perhaps is interested in, I would love to hear.
I think
What
I could
interest-
definitely use another class on prayer and
You could
blessings.
use. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, and
definitely.
blessings. Should we go
Yeah.
back? Wait a minute. I don't know if we didn't do this year, the blessings on food. Do we want to do that? Should we do it
That
again?
would be great. Yeah.
Is that
Like
helpful, or
we
is that going to
briefly
be?
touched on it, but
So yeah, I
was
think I
left a
did it
little
last
confused.
year, but that kind of feels good to do every year. And I guess somebody who did it, if you don't want to, you don't have to attend that, or it can be a nice review, or you'll end up asking more powerful questions, which is always helpful. So let's do one on. I think that's a good idea, because then you can also remember Tifara. Ruth really inspired us by saying, well, she started to really do the blessings. So I find that's kind of the easiest easier than prayer is to say the blessings over food. And I will share, I made a table. Hadassah, actually, who's on this time, she's the one who inspired me to make a table with all the blessings of food. So that was helpful to her. So I will share that. Okay, let's do that. And then I'll talk about some of the other, I'll look at, what's left in our life cycle. And I think we will probably at some point still do prayer. I think before the holiday of Pesach, of Passover, we should probably not only go again about what happens, because Pesach is so complicated, but we should also do something again on prayer on Yom Tov, which is similar to Shabbat, but different. So that usually deserves its own repetition. So, okay, next time we're going to do blessings on food. That's the before and after blessings. That's great. Come with all your questions.
When is next time?
Next week.
Is that
Something happening next week? 1 second.
a holiday?
Let me look. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Actually,
Is-
here, I
And
can
there's
turn on
another
the
holiday coming
recording.
up?
Wait, hold on 1 second. I'm so glad Jeff keeps me on track. It's very helpful.